All right, so we need to finish up talking about integrated marketing communication this morning. And then we're going to talk about what makes an ad great. I'm going to attempt to play an ad video to illustrate it's one of my favorite ads of all time and talk about whether or not we think the ad is great. I have to watch the live feed because when I try to play videos from time to time, YouTube will shut it down. It recognizes the video. So if that's the case, for those of you who are in the extended class section, what I will have to do is it doesn't always do this, depending on the video. It may stop the live feed, in which case I'll have to restart the live feed after the video. So if you want to, if you are not able to watch the video on the live feed because it stops it, right now in YouTube, you should search for Herding Cats, H-E-A-R-D-I-N-G, Cats commercial. And that will be the commercial that we will watch, and we'll discuss that commercial in terms of its effectiveness as an ad. I think it's one that illustrates a really good quality of ad, but maybe not necessarily a great ad. So in the stages of the buying decision, so you also think about, as we develop the marketing mix, we talked about the complexity of the product, and I gave you an example of my sister is a vice president for Boeing. She sells aircraft largely to governments. Boeing is not advertising on television because that would be a waste of coverage, because people don't generally go in and say, as I pointed out last time, I want to fly in the 737 Supermax, or I want to fly in a 747. That's not the way it works. Airlines schedule what aircraft they're going to use based on the route and the demand and characteristics like that. And you don't have, as a consumer, have the luxury of doing that. So it'd be wasted coverage. So Boeing relies on personal selling or professional selling in terms of their marketing mix. Now, Boeing has other products that they do advertising for. So for example, one of the things that I believe is a Boeing company, since I'm a licensed commercial pilot, I use for flight planning purposes something called ForeFlight, which allows me to very quickly, in the olden days, when I first started learning to fly, I started taking flying lessons when I was 8 years old in the early 1980s. You would actually get out a sectional chart if you're a VFR pilot, and you would go to the sectional chart with a plotter, and you would draw a line with a pencil across your sectional chart. Sectional charts are updated every 56 days. I believe you'd get a plotter out and you'd draw, to places that you wanted to go along a route, and you'd calculate the distance using that plotter on the sectional chart. And then you would calculate the winds aloft if you had a headwind or a tailwind based on the characteristics of your aircraft. And then you would come up with an estimated time en route, and you would use that in filing your flight plan. Now, with modern technology, ForeFlight does all of this for you. You just punch into ForeFlight various locations, or you can create waypoints on the sectional or on an IFR chart. If you're doing instrument flight rules, you just tell it which routes you want and which vectors you want, and it automatically calculates it. They automatically sync the briefing with the flight planning, and so it calculates the winds aloft. You can enter into the program the characteristics of your aircraft one time, and you can just hit that profile and it will upload it as well. Now, this is a fairly popular product. I believe it's a Boeing product among pilots, but again, they're still not using traditional advertising in terms of television ads, because how many pilots are there out there? Well, there are just not a lot. There are more, obviously, private pilots than there are airline transport pilots and airline companies, but it's still one of those things that it's not, they're not relying on that. They're not relying necessarily on professional selling. They are advertising in things like trade journals and trade publications like AOPA, the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. So thinking about the product, and then also thinking about where buyers are in that decision-making process and how you're going to reach them. So in the pre-purchase decision, advertising and samples are often used. Samples are used for low risk products. They used to send all kinds of samples out in the mail. They don't do that so much, but used to get, when I was a kid, I remember, my family would get all kinds of samples for Tide soap or Gain, or you would get little boxes of cereal when they released a new consumer packaged cereal. And you could try those and they would hope that that would get out. And coupons obviously are also a way of doing that. In the purchasing decision, personal selling are often used. Sales promotion can be used to encourage demand. And then in the post-purchase, advertising can be used to reassure people. Why is it that Ford every year in their advertisements that highlights the fact that Ford is the #1 selling truck in America? Well, that does two things. It does for those people that are in the pre-purchase category who have not bought a Ford F-150. It lets them know that this is a high quality product. There's a reason that Ford is the #1 selling truck for 40 something odd years in a row in America. For those people who are Ford buyers and have already bought the Ford, it reassures them that they made a good decision and that they should probably, when they go to buy their next pickup truck, consider purchasing that product. So the channel strategy in developing the integrated marketing communication program. A push strategy. This is directing promotion to the channel members to gain their cooperation. For example, offering discounts on volumes to wholesalers so that they push that product through their channel, so that they encourage their retailers, for example, to buy it, giving them incentives. Using slotting fees to get retailers to put your product in a more prime location on the shelves in Walmart or in Cash Saver or Homeland or whatever retail outlet they're targeting. Historically, this is one where you can see a difference in the push and pull strategy, and you can combine these. Historically, prescription pharmaceutical products they used a push strategy. They had drug reps that would go out, and my sister-in-law she was a drug rep currently. She's been a medical device rep as well in the past. But they would go out to doctors' offices and they would talk about the new drug. And my business actually benefited from this for years and years and years. We do murder mystery parties at the Stone Line Inn. And so what we would do is we would have these drug companies that would come in, these drug reps that would come in and say, we want you to do a murder mystery and we want you to write. And I'll never forget, one of the ones that we did was for Viagra. We want you to write Viagra into the script of the murder mystery, and we're going to bring a group of doctors and we're going to provide an hour of training for them, and then we'll do the murder mystery, and hopefully those doctors will then prescribe. Like I said, one of the ones that we did was Viagra. We've also done high blood pressure meds and all these others. They stopped doing this and they went to a pull strategy because the IRS code changed. The IRS interpreted the code differently. In the 1980s and early 1990s, the IRS, so this is how a environmental scan and a governmental regulation can impact how you engage in your integrated marketing communication program. And they still use drug reps, but they can't go out and take doctors. In the 1980s and 1990s, they would take doctors to Vegas. They would take doctors to our business, and they would provide dinner. We provided dinner, and the drug companies would provide alcohol, and they'd have this little party, and you hope the doctors would then prescribe your drug under the guise of education. Well, the IRS reinterpreted their code, and they now said those are taxable income to doctors that you have to 1099 them for. And so all of a sudden, doctors didn't want to come to these things because they don't want to. They don't want to pay tax on something like this. And so it really affected the way, they had all of the drug companies had suites at Remington Park, for example, when Remington Park first opened, where they would take doctors to race days. They can't do that anymore. They still rely on professional sales, but as a result of that, they started relying more heavily on a pull strategy where you see these ads now. And, some of the first ones that I remember are ads for things like Prozac. And there's this little funny creature in the Prozac ad. It's a little like ball looking thing, maybe a hamster, a cartoon, and it's got a little cloud that follows it around. And all of a sudden, the sun comes out and the cloud is lifted and the creature is all of a sudden happy. And it's an ad for, I think it was Prozac. And the idea is that you get people to start going to their doctors and saying things like, I'm depressed. I think I need Prozac. They do this with Latuda. Is your antidepressant not working? Do you suffer from bipolar disorder? Perhaps you should, consider adding this drug. And so now it's a pull strategy. You get consumers to go to their doctors and say, my antidepressant isn't working well enough for me. I want X, Y, and Z. Now, this presents, I think, an area, again, how all of these things interrelate. At the beginning of the semester, we talked about ethics and marketing. This is a huge ethical challenge, I think, for marketers. This direct consumer, we are one of only 2 nations in the world that allow for the direct consumer advertising of pharmaceutical products. The other country is New Zealand. And we advertise all kinds of stuff now. And there's maybe a benefit, but there are also many disadvantages to this. One of the benefits that I can think of in advertising things like Prozac or Wellbutrin or some of these other drugs is that we have, in many instances, eliminated the stereotypes that are associated with mental health. My father was the special agent in charge for the Federal Bureau of Investigation's field office at Santa Fe, New Mexico. And when he went into the Bureau under the most famous director of the Bureau, who was actually not a great person, but he's enormously famous, a guy named J. Edgar Hoover. And at the time my father went into the Bureau, everyone had to meet the director. And if you had ever seen a psychiatrist or a psychologist at any point in your life, that was an a priori bar for employment in the FBI. Because the attitude in the 1950s and 60s was that if you went to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, you were obviously crazy. You were damaged and broken and insane. And there were all kinds of government jobs that were closed to you if you did this. Now, as a result of, I think largely as a result of direct consumer advertising of pharmaceutical sales, we recognize that mental health is just like other types of health. It doesn't mean you're crazy. It doesn't mean you're a bad person or that you're broken or defective. It means that maybe you have a condition that we can treat. And so I think one of the things that direct consumer advertising has done in this pull strategy from an ethics standpoint is it has increased awareness. Now, the bad part of that is that as Americans, as a result of this pull strategy and the use of direct consumer advertising of pharmaceutical drugs, we have come to believe that you can solve all problems with a drug. Prilosec, the little purple pill. Prilosec treats acid reflux. and you have people running out, and now Prilosec is over the counter. I think they've actually taken it off the market because I think it's one of the drugs that they've discovered causes cancer. Or they think that it may cause cancer, so they pulled it. But there are all kinds of these over the counter antacid drugs that they advertise on television. When you get to be my age, when I was your age, I could eat. I weighed, when I married my second spouse, I weighed 159 pounds. I wore a size 29 jean. It's 29 waist. When you get to be 50, you can't eat like you did when you were in your 20s. Most of us can't. I could eat Doritos and beer all day long in my 20s, and I didn't gain weight, and I didn't have any problems like heartburn or acid reflux. When you get to be 50, you can't do that anymore. And maybe you shouldn't take the pill. Maybe you should put down the Doritos and beer, right? And recognize that, you know, that this is just probably not health food, and that you maybe this is your body's way of saying, don't do that. So these push strategies or pull strategies, depending on the kind of product. Historically, again, the reason that you used a push strategy, you direct the promotional marketing mix at channel members like doctors, is because doctors were the ones who knew, you know, they have advanced knowledge in medicine to understand this, rather than, you know, having consumers go in. And now if you go in, because insurance companies only give doctors, if they want to make money, they can only spend about 5 minutes with you in the doctor's office. And, you know, if you go in and say, I'm depressed and I want Prozac, they'll probably give it to you. You know, rather than taking the time to figure out whether or not this, you know, if your dog just died, if you've changed jobs recently, if you've moved, if you've gotten a divorce, you're probably going to be depressed. And that's a normal human emotion. And maybe you don't need the drug. We've seen this happen with opioids in this country. People go and complain of pain, and before we realized how addictive these products were, doctors were prescribing, you know, tons of oxycodone. And we have a whole generation now of people, and we have entire areas of the country where people are horribly addicted to this stuff. And maybe we should think about that and the ethics associated with that. So what makes an ad great? What do you all think makes an ad great?
You remember it.
You remember it. Why do you remember an ad? What makes you remember an ad?
Grabs your attention.
Okay, it grabs your attention.
Increases sales.
It increases sales. So there should be something that an ad does that leads to an action. How do we do that? How do we grab your attention and increase sales? What is it that is associated with that? Well, in studying this for a long time and studying advertisements and ethics, I've come to the conclusion that there are two things that make an ad great. One, it engages the mind of the consumer. How do you do that? How do you engage the mind of the, well, you are creative. Yeah, what do you think? You engage the mind of the consumer.
Painting a picture in their head of them.
Yeah, you use a story. You paint a mental image in the mind of the consumer that they remember.
I think also like the emotional connection, like the ads that have the whole like family thing or Christmas, like you feel connected to them?
I think that's true. Yeah, we use a lot of symbols in this country, and they're important, and they evoke emotion, and you can engage the mind of the consumer. Now, one of the things that you can do, and again, this is again how ethics and all of this combines, is you can use fear. Fear is an incredible motivator. If you use fear, you have to provide hope. Cancer. Cancer is scary. CTCA, and they used to do this ad. There was this woman named Peggy Kessler, and I feel sort of bad because I was sort of callous in the past. I have a cousin who is a full professor of oncology, radiation oncology at the University of Texas. And his specialty is pancreatic cancer. And if you get pancreatic cancer, you're going to die, probably. Less than 7% of people who develop pancreatic cancer have a 5-year survival rate. Less than 7%. Peggy Kessler was one that lived quite a while. So CTCA did this ad with Peggy. And there are 2 types of pancreatic cancer. The most common type, it's very fast. We've had 2 members, unfortunately, in the College of Business that retired, and within a year, both of those individuals developed pancreatic cancer and were deceased within 6 months. They were diagnosed and deceased, each of them. I mean, it's a very fast-acting cancer. A more rare type of pancreatic cancer can be treated, and it may go into remission, but it will probably come back. And CTCA had these ads with Peggy. The first ad that they did with Peggy was, Peggy says, I went to my doctor and he said, Peggy, you have pancreatic cancer. And I said, well, what are we going to do? And he said, you're going to die. And then I went to CTCA and they cured me. You say the word cancer and it automatically creates fear. And CTCA does a good job, in my opinion, of providing hope. All you have to do is use the word cancer and people have fear, and they provided a lot of hope. They've taken the Peggy ad down. The second Peggy ad was, I can't believe it's been 10 years ago. Well, Peggy eventually died of pancreatic cancer, and CTCA has pulled that ad. I would submit to you that if you get an advanced type of cancer, CTCA does a good job of advertising. I don't know that I would go to CTCA. I think I would I'd go to Houston, and talk to the doctors down there. I don't think I would be going to CTCA. They have good ads. Not sure that they're really ethical. Use fear, provide hope. Not sure there's a lot of ethics in there, right? So it engages the mind of the consumer. You can use fear and hope. And actually, fear and hope are very powerful motivators. You can also use humor, but humor is far less powerful. But again, you also have to think about the kind of product, service, or idea that you're trying to sell. It's hard if you're selling Doritos to use fear, right? I mean, so they use a lot of times Doritos ads during the Super Bowl. Doritos has had some really funny ads in the past that I can remember. Humor is less effective, but it's hard to make, Doritos scary. I guess you could make hunger scary, but Doritos is probably not a great one. So you engage the mind of the consumer, and then you deliver a selling message. It's not enough to engage the mind of the consumer. They have to then remember the ad. They have to remember the product. And this is where lots of products go wrong, is in this area. So again, if you are watching in the extended class section, if the video stops, I may have to restart it, but I would like to watch this ad. Again, the ad is, you go to YouTube and Google herding cats video. All right. So the reason I show you that ad is that was an award-winning ad the year it came out. It's hysterically funny. I mean, it's really funny. What makes it funny?
It's uncommon,
It's uncommon.
it's different.
It's absolutely novel. You don't think of cowboys and the rugged West as being, sort of sensitive and caring. You've got these rugged looking individuals. And the American West, by the way, this is part of American mythology. This is a huge part. So we have mythology. The Wild West, and there are all kinds of Westerns. Westerns for years and years and years were one of the most popular genres of movies. And they still continue to be, even in a technologically sophisticated age, we still have Westerns that are being made. Not in the numbers that they were made in the 1950s and 60s, but they're still being made. And they even make, more like high-tech sort of steampunk Western movies where, it's a sort of maybe a spoof or something like that on the Western. But this iconic image has been played out and used in advertising forever. So you've got this iconic image of the American cowboy. And again, by the way, that time period in American history lasted for all of about 5 seconds in reality. The great cattle drives, it was actually a very short period of American history. And that's not, and we still have this mythology, and it's still powerful. We still engage in farm aid, trying to say there's no such thing as a small-time farmer for the most part anymore. They just don't exist. There are some that have eked out a living by creating sort of boutique, all natural, organic, grass-fed beef cattle. But by and large, on the whole, American agricultural production is done by large companies like Ralston Purina, Monsanto. So you've got this iconic image of the American cowboy, and then you juxtapose it with, what could be more sort of cute and cuddly and fluffy than a kitty? You got these little kitties, and they're herding cats and they're driving them across a river and they're saving the cats in the river. And so it's enormously funny. It engages the mind of the consumer. It's got a storyline, right? You got these cowboys out there, you see them, gathering the cats up, herding them across bringing them into town. So it engages the mind of the consumer. Where does it fall short? Well, I don't think this ad delivered a selling message. This ad was an award-winning ad when it was released, but people couldn't remember the company the next day. They remembered the ad, but they had no idea what the company was. They had no idea what EDS did. You all don't know what EDS does. Engage the mind of the consumer, utterly failed, I think, to deliver a selling message. Doesn't describe or talk about the product. Anybody know what EDS was? It stands for Electronic Data Systems. It was founded by a guy named H. Ross Perot, who was a billionaire, the first billionaire to run for president and self-fund his own campaign as an independent candidate. He ran in 1992 against George Herbert Walker Bush, that's Pappy Bush, and Bill Clinton. And a lot of people theorize that he's the reason that George Herbert Walker Bush failed. Because you had this businessman, historically speaking, the Republican Party has been the party of, in the words of the younger Bush, George Walker Bush, business. That's Texan and Oklahoman for business, BIDDNESS. When George W. was governor of Texas, he said, the business of business is business, and it's the business of the Texas legislature to take care of business, TCP. You had this big businessman from Texas running against another businessman from Texas, although Herbert Walker Bush wasn't really from Texas, but he did represent Texas in Congress at one point in time. And he split the Republican vote, and Bill Clinton won. The unelectable Bill Clinton won. But this was Ross Perot's company. I don't know what they do. I mean, if you watch that ad, I have no idea what they do, what they're selling. They did data management. But you have no idea, right? Doesn't show the product, doesn't describe the product. I mean, it doesn't really deliver, except at the end where they said, this is sort of what we do, is bring people together. Okay, not sure that delivered a selling message. Let's see if I can play one more. For those of you in the extended section, you can go to YouTube and type in wolves ad or Bush Wolves ad from 2004. I think that was an effective ad. It engaged the mind of the consumer. You've got this shadowy forest. What?
Oh, I remember that from when I was like 6 years old.
Yeah. You've got the shadows in the forest. It's kind of creepy. It's scary. And then you see the wolves in a pack. Uses fear. Now, the one thing it doesn't necessarily do is at the end, it didn't do what? It didn't provide, it didn't explicitly provide. Didn't explicitly say, vote for George W. Bush. I guess it's implicitly implied that you should vote for George W. Bush and he will keep America safe. So engage the mind of the consumer, deliver a selling message. And lots of ads get very creative. Lots of ads are very good at engaging the mind of the consumer, and then they fail utterly to deliver that selling message. In the past, it was harder to track the effectiveness of ads. It's becoming easier as we have big data. As we have big data. So I had a question from the extended section. To determine whether or not we're reaching, particularly with internet ads and mobile advertisements, to determine whether or not people are clicking through, and if they click through, are they actually engaging in purchasing of the product. So call to action and then get a response. Any questions about IMC?
I kind of have a question about like advertising in like big companies, because like companies like Nike, I feel like don't necessarily have to sell their products just because like they're a really well-known brand. So like how do like bigger companies that like everybody knows what they are and their products sell? Like do they still have to fit inside their same requirements, or is there more leeway since they are such a well-known?
Nike still engages in advertisements, right? I mean, that's a really good question. Why do companies like Nike continue? Why does McDonald's continue? Everybody knows what McDonald's is, right? I mean, we all know McDonald's is fast, cheap, consistent food. Why do they continue to engage in television advertising? And Nike does engage in advertising. They don't engage, they have in the past engaged in, and that's a really good question, they have engaged in more television advertising than they do now. They still do engage in television advertising. It's usually selected. So where will you see Nike ads? During what kinds of things will you see advertisements actually for Nike? They don't generally advertise Nike, for example. I haven't seen a Nike ad during a primetime sitcom in years. But where will you see a Nike ad? During sporting events, yeah. Particularly like tennis events. You'll see Nike ads during tennis ads. But everybody knows what Nike is, but they still continue to advertise. They advertise at events. They advertise in specialty publications online, things like that. And they release new products. You know, they'll release a new, for years, one of the most popular product lines that Nike had was the Air Jordans. And they would release new products and they would have advertisements. So why do they continue to advertise when I mean, if you want good quality footwear, and Nike actually used to at one point in time make their own footwear, they don't anymore. What do? They contract for it to be made in other, you know, offshoring for those products to be made, for example, in China and Taiwan and things like that. But they still remind consumers so that you stay in the mind of the, so that people don't forget. And so that people remember, you know, that when they, you know, first started playing tennis, or they first started running, or they first started playing basketball, that they wore Nikes, and Nike's a good product. McDonald's is the, you know, McDonald's is trying to remind people that, you know, if you want breakfast, McDonald's, and they've switched. They introduced new products, so they've come out with the McCafe, and as I've suggested to you, McDonald's has tried. They started losing a goodly amount of market share to Starbucks in their morning, and so they've now shifted and they've started to do the McCafe, and you can get more of the sort of craft coffee drinks, caffeinated coffee drinks at McDonald's. They've got, my brother is addicted to their vanilla iced coffee. And so, you know, McDonald's still advertises, even though they've got by far the largest market share of the fast food industry. They want to maintain that. They've lost some market share to Starbucks in the past. So they engage in advertising, even though they're huge. Why does Walmart engage in advertising? I mean, obviously Walmart is the 800-pound gorilla of the retail sector. Now they've started to lose to who? To Amazon. They've started to lose to Amazon because if I don't have to go, I mean, I am like, I don't know about the rest of you, I go to Walmart at least once a week, and I am like a man going to the gallows when I have to go to Walmart. I have found evidence that the Yeti exists, and they are at the Guthrie Walmart, and they're always there with their Yeti children, you know, in front of me. I don't know why they insist on bringing all 12 of their kids into Walmart in line in front of me. It's a horrible experience, but it's one of those things where you sort of have to go. And Amazon has basically come up with a better mousetrap in that you can now avoid, I mean, they ship all kinds of stuff direct to your door, second day delivery, right? But there's still, you run out of underarm deodorant, you still have to go to Walmart every once in a while. And, you know, so Walmart continues to advertise, even though they are huge. They continue to update their brand and reposition. So let's talk about professional selling.
For Nike's advertisement is one of the ways that they advertise, like, you know how they have the athletes and they're just all decked out in Nike? Is that a different type of advertisement technique? Or is that just?
So that's that's actually a really good question, because that is where you're getting famous people to endorse your product. And that is controversial. You want the famous people to endorse your product. You pay them to endorse your product, to be in advertisements for the product. You know, did Michael Jordan actually design or have much to do with Air Jordans? No. I mean, you know, like, there are design people that do that. But he's such a well-known figure. At the time, he was probably, you know, the greatest basketball player there was, right? I mean, it's debatable as to whether he still, you know, holds that position. I mean, there are other players that have become sort of equally or maybe more skilled or more talented than he was, but he was certainly like the biggest name in that sport. And so you get this endorsement. Now what happens if, now he never had a scandal, but Tiger Woods, for example, Tiger Woods, Buick got Tiger Woods to endorse Buick, and they had Tiger Woods in advertisements for Buick. And why did they want Tiger Woods to endorse Buick? Well, historically, who bought Buicks? Old people, right? Yes, it was an old lady car. Buick was a solidly upper middle class Republican woman car. That's who bought Buicks. You know, it's like Richard Nixon talked about how his wife didn't have a mink coat. She had a good Republican cloth coat. That's what Buick was. And Buick has tried to redefine their image. They've stopped using Tiger Woods when he started having all of his problems. And now they've got this, I'm in the Buick. It's not your parents' Buick, right? They're looking around for like this old lady car, and the idea is that Buick is not necessarily that. I think primarily the buyers of Buicks are still people that are over 65, if I had to guess, in my guesstimation of that market. But they got Tiger Woods because here's this young, talented, nice looking athlete. And it was a demographic, not only was he young, he was also mixed race. And so you had this, you know, biracial, young, talented, good-looking athlete endorsing Buick. And maybe that was effective in getting people, because people thought Tiger was cool, and getting people to think, well, maybe Buick is not such an uncool product that I'll buy a Buick. I sort of don't think it worked. And then Tiger, of course, had all of his problems. And what happens to your ad campaign at that point? When you've got this endorsement from somebody and they sort of fall from grace, it can taint your product. It can affect your product, right? So now again, Tiger is back, and people want to get him to endorse products again because Americans love to watch our celebrities fall, but we also like to watch them pick themselves up and become successful again. And so, celebrity endorsements, I think, are it can be a very mixed bag. For Nike, Michael Jordan never lost the luster. He never did anything, but lots of celebrities have had these little ethical problems, and it's affected the companies, and they've fled from them. But yeah, you use celebrity endorsements particularly with things like shoes and sporting apparel, and I think it works. One of the things that I think that you have to be careful about with regard to celebrity endorsements is I think it has to be congruent with the product that you're trying to sell. And one of the problems that I think you had with Tiger Woods selling Buicks is there's nothing inherently connected between car sales and golf. And so I don't know that there's not a nexus there. There's not a connection between the product that you're trying to sell and what that celebrity is known for. I think Nike did a good job with Michael Jordan because there's a huge obviously, what kind of footwear an athlete wears on the court can affect their play, right? If Tiger Woods is pitching golf clubs, I think there's a connection there. If he's pitching golf balls, there's a connection there between the product that's being offered and the celebrity. Notoriously, historically, in the past, the Democrat Party has relied very heavily on, overwhelmingly, Hollywood is liberal. Actors and actresses. There are some notable exceptions to that of Republicans that are, Clint Eastwood is a notable exception. He became mayor of a city in California, and he's a lifelong Republican. But historically, Hollywood has tended to be more liberal than the population as a whole. And the Democratic Party has attempted to capitalize on that. And in places like Oklahoma, they paint them as, sort of pinko liberal commies. And I'm not sure, why is it that George Clooney thinks that anybody cares what his opinion is on environmental issues? The Democrats have had him go and testify before Congress before, for example, on environmental issues. Well, he seems like a nice enough man. He's, pleasant to look at, but he's not a climate scientist. And why should his opinion matter any more than, anybody else's? So you have to be real careful with celebrity endorsements. I think that's a really good question. And I think the congruence between the product and the endorser is critically important. So sales. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about because we are largely a sales program here at UCO. We decided about 15 years ago that we wanted to focus on sales, and we became a sales program. And when we started the sales program, there weren't a whole lot of sales programs out there in the country. There are still only about 115 programs. We have one of them. We have the only program in the state. And of those programs, most of those programs don't have a full major. So we're unique here at UCO in that we have a major, a minor in sales. Most of them will have either like a certificate in sales or a emphasis in sales or maybe a minor in sales, but they don't have a full major. We have a full major, a minor, and we're developing an MBA concentration in sales here in Salesforce management at UCO. So if we do that, I think there are only 3 schools in the nation that currently have an advanced master's level program in sales. It's odd to me that students say, I want to get a business degree, or rather maybe their parents want to get a business degree. So I went and I did some flight school, some ground school a couple of weekends ago, and the instructor of the ground school that I went to, it was in Dallas, Fort Worth, he said, I told my kids, I'll pay for any degree you want, but you have to get a business degree first. And he said, all of my kids balked. He said, I have a kid who wants to be a musician, and he was very upset. And I said, I'll pay for a music degree, but you have to get a business degree first. And he said, of course, his son, who is the musician, then went and got a degree in music, and guess how much money he's made as a musician? Nothing. 0. Guess how much he's made as a business person? He's a salesperson, right? So we have a lot of students that come in and they say, I want to get a business degree, but I don't want to do sales. Not realizing that almost everybody's first job is in sales. Almost you start out in sales. And everybody sells something. Even if it's just your labor to an employer. When you go on a job interview, what is that? You are selling yourself. And it's something you should do. I go on job interviews all the time, even for jobs that I have no interest in taking the job. I go on the market every single year, and I get interviews every single year, and I love it. I don't understand why students don't like to do this. This is the first, this is the only time in your life that people will really want to talk about you. Think about that. Most of the time, people want to talk about themselves. And I tell students, it's not a question I ask, but one of the first questions that almost everybody asks when they first meet you is, what do you do? It's not a question I ask. And I'm going to tell you this, people don't care about you for the most part. Why do they ask that question? Because it's an instant way of being able to peg where you are on the social ladder. It's instantly they can put you in a class. Now, Americans are famous for saying, we don't have a class system. We do. If you don't think that we have a class system. Now, in America, it's a lot more egalitarian, and our class system tends to be based on merit. Whereas in places like Great Britain, if you are not born into the upper class, you will never make it. Even if it doesn't matter how much money you have, if you are not born into an aristocratic family, you will never be upper class in Great Britain. That's just the way it is. They have a very strict class system. And it's based on birth and titles that are archaic and mean absolutely nothing. But we do have a class system in the United States. Interestingly enough, if you ask people, what class are you? Overwhelmingly, they'll say, well, we really don't have a class system in America, but I am. What do you think they say? Everybody says they're middle class, even if they're not. Even if they're enormously wealthy, they have a tendency to say, I'm middle class. And even if they're working class, they have a tendency to say, I'm middle class. That's the number one answer on surveys that people will give is I'm middle class. Even if their income and their education don't correspond to that classification. So people ask you this question, I tell students, they ask you this question because it automatically pegs you. If you say I'm a doctor or I'm a lawyer, people automatically know where you are. The other reason that they ask that question is because it then is an opening for them to tell you what they do, to talk about themselves. Job interviews are the one time when people are actually focused on you. So I love going on job interviews because I love to talk about myself. I have a narcissistic personality disorder, and I love talking about myself. And it gives me, they take you out to lunch, and they're solely focused on you for that one day. So it's a skill that you should practice, and it involves selling, right? So even if we're not going to be salespeople, sales skills are transferable to other contexts in our lives. We're going to sell ourselves to our employers. We sell ourselves to our friends. We try to persuade them. We try to influence each other. Children are great salesmen. You wanted to do something as a kid, and you had to, and you knew, right? You prospected as a kid. You knew which parent was more likely to say yes to which activity it was that you wanted to do. And then you would go sell them. I want to go to Monty's house for dinner tonight. You know, I would always go ask my mother. She would always say yes. My father was, no, dinner is family time. You know, sit down, eat your steak. That was, so I always knew, right? Great prospecting, was great at pitching things, you know, so that you would get what you want. So we persuade our parents. Children are fantastic salesmen. Politicians use sales techniques to persuade voters. When Harry Truman was ending his second term, so he becomes president because Franklin Delano Roosevelt is the only president to have served more than 2 terms. He was elected to 4, and he dies very early in his 4th term. And Harry Truman, who was totally unprepared, they didn't really treat vice presidents very well back then. In fact, one former vice president said the position wasn't worth more than a bucket of spit. So Harry Truman is all of a sudden elevated to the presidency, and they think he's going to lose. And there's a famous picture of him holding up a newspaper that says, "Dewey defeats Truman." Because they had predicted, they'd done this poll, and there's been a lot of discussion in the political marketing arena about that poll and that election, because it was predicted that Dewey was going to defeat Truman. At that point in time, they did a telephone poll of voters, and the problem was, at that point, who owned telephones? It was only the wealthy. And they were going to vote for the Republican. And Truman is smiling in the picture, holding up, because he won the election. Then the pendulum swings, and Eisenhower is elected president after Truman's second term. He doesn't run again. And Eisenhower is elected. And there's a famous apocryphal story about Truman saying, "Poor Ike, he'll be the most frustrated man in America because he'll say, do this and do that, and nothing will happen." If you're a general, Eisenhower was a general in the military before he became president. And if you're a general in the military, if you say, do this and do that, things happen. People below you, if you say jump, they say how high. That's not the way the rest of the civilian bureaucracy works. The vast majority of the rest of the bureaucracy are what we call merit-protected employees. And presidents come and go, and the bureaucracy stays the same. Donald Trump learned this. Or maybe he didn't learn it. You know, he said, I'm going to do these things. I'm going to build a wall. It's going to be a big, beautiful wall with a door. And how much wall actually got built? something like less than 50 new miles of wall got built. Because when you're a businessman and you own a business, you say, do this and do that, and people do it. If you're in the military and you're a general and you've been Supreme Allied Commander of Europe during the war, and you say, do this and do that, people do it. And when you're president, you can say, do this and do that, and the bureaucracy just stays the same. You have to figure out how to sell the bureaucrats on this. I'll never forget one of the people that I used to have come talk to my class when I was a political scientist was a guy that I had met. I worked on the David Walters campaign. My best friend was the assistant campaign manager for David Walters. He was the highest ranking campaign official to not have been indicted after Walters won. And it's because he didn't get a job in the Walters administration. But he had this other guy that worked on the campaign, and he was basically like an assistant chief of staff to David Walters. And Walters said, I need you to go and fly to this conference on, and I can't remember what it was on infrastructure or something like that. And oh, by the way, it's, like tomorrow. So we need you to get on a plane. So go down to travel. And the guy goes down, he's like, he's talking to this clerk, he's the assistant chief of staff of the Walters governor's office. And in the basement of the Capitol is the travel clerk for the Capitol. And he says, I need you to sign here and here and here and here and here so that I can get on a plane and go. The governor said, do this. And she said, I'm not signing anything until I read it. He's like, no, you don't understand. I need you to sign here and here and here and here, and I need to get on a plane. And she said, I'm not signing anything unless I read it. And he said, if you don't sign here and here and here and here, I'm going to make sure you're fired. Turns out that person was a merit-protected employee, and she said, I'm not signing anything until I read it, and I'm going to lunch. And the assistant chief of staff of the governor didn't make the flight because he pissed off a bureaucrat. Better learn how to sell it, or the bureaucracy can stop you in your tracks. So these skills are transferable to all other kinds of contexts, even if you don't want to be a salesman, right? We're going to use these skills throughout our life, and so they're really important. So the value of salespeople. New and innovative products require sales techniques to achieve adoption. You all grew up with these devices on your desk, and I didn't get a laptop computer until I was, I think, a junior in college. And it weighed something like 14 pounds. Not really. I mean, I think it weighed like 7 or 8 pounds. It was heavy, and it was basically just a word processor for the most part. It didn't do a whole lot of, you could do Excel and stuff like, but it was pretty much a word processor. You've grown up with these products. Everybody has a laptop now. Everybody wants a laptop. We all know how to use laptops. But in the early age, people had to, why would you want that? The screens were tiny. The first laptop I had, it had this little tiny screen, and they were, basically black and white screens. There was no color. You could get a bigger monitor. You could see things better if you had a desktop. They had to sell these products. So new and innovative products require salespeople to get people to try it, to adopt that product over what is existing. Salespeople are the eyes and ears of the company. They engage in the external environment. All marketing is the only fully integrated function of the firm. Marketing is the only one that coordinates all of the internal functions of the firm and then engages with the external environment. And salespeople are the primary source of that engagement. They're the ones who are out there looking at what the competition has, understanding what customers' needs are. So they play a vital role in connecting the company to the external environment. They're enormously important. Sales is the most important job in any organization. when I was in the private sector, every year, and it would just annoy the hell out of the rest of us. Every year, the president of the company at our annual Christmas party would stand up and say, I just want to thank Neil, who was our CFO, and the accounting department for keeping the wheels on. No. Accounting didn't sell. Like, the doors stay open because salespeople sold product. You don't have sales, you don't have a company. You don't sell, you can have a great product, you don't sell it, you're gonna go broke, right? So salespeople are like the most critical part of any company. They're the ones who make sure that you have revenue coming in the door. They generate revenue. So what do salespeople do? They identify potential customers. They engage in prospecting. They determine what those prospects' needs are and how to satisfy those needs. They provide customers with critical information on products and services. And generally, because they are so critically important, compensation for salespeople is higher than other aspects of the firm. Sales is the only profession that you can go into and decide what it is you want to make. I always use my friend Adam, who works for US Foods, as an example of this. He used to come and talk to my classes a lot. He decided he wanted to take his family to Disney World. He decided where he wanted to stay. He figured out how much more he had to sell in a year to do that. If they didn't want to give up something else in their budget, how much more, and it came out to, he sold primarily in Western Oklahoma, so he didn't sell a lot of produce. He didn't sell fresh, he sold meat products. He figured out he had to sell an extra case of meat a week to be able to take his family to Disney World. And he did it. Sales is the only, if you get a degree in accounting, you will probably get a high starting salary, but that's it, right? I mean, you may get pay raises along the way, but salespeople can actually, in most instances, determine what it is that they want to make. How hard do I want to work to make that? How much do I want to develop my territory to do that? So you can actually choose, what it is that you're going to make. Now, the disadvantage of sales is that it's real easy to tell. It's real hard to tell if an accountant is doing their job, right? I mean, like, as long as, the books sort of balance, as long as the IRS isn't breathing down your door. HR, that's another one. Who the hell knows what they do, right? Like, they're supposed to file stuff. How do you know if they filed it right or wrong? Like, they're file clerks. How do you file stuff incorrectly? You can. Technically, and most HR departments don't know this, for example, you are supposed to keep things like I-9s and tax information in a separate file, and they don't ever do this because that contains social security numbers and sensitive data, and like, the supervisors are not supposed to see that, and they never do this. And nobody ever really knows, right? That they're filing wrong. They're filing it all, everybody does this. They all keep one file for everything. Because it takes up space and it's a pain in the rear to do this, to actually segregate the data the way it's supposed to be done. But they're filing wrong. Who knows? They're even filing at all. With sales, it's real easy to determine whether or not you've met your quota, right? Oh, you didn't sell your salary. So that is one of the downfalls, is there is some pressure, but compensation is generally higher. that's a good place to stop because I am out of time. So we will pick up with this, and Thursday is our last class. Then finals week is next week. The exam will be on D2L by Monday. And you will have the entire week of finals to take the final exam. So Thursday will be our last class. Is that right? This is the last week of class. Next week is finals. I got that right? Yeah. Okay. Just making sure. So I will see you all for our final class on Thursday. And then I guess I hope you guys have a fantastic summer after that. I'm looking forward to my summer.